CFI. We are a national, actually we're an international now, nonprofit organization that works to build consumer trust and confidence in today's food system. So we're going to spend just a little bit of time this morning. I know we got to finish by 10, but we'll spend a little bit of time just walking through some consumer perceptions in regards to the food system. Now, everything that I talk about here isn't going to necessarily be pork specific. It's going to be more food centric, but they still do apply a lot to the pork industry. But hopefully, we'll share a little bit about the various changes that are occurring in society in regards to how a consumer thinks about food. A little bit of information in regards to how that impacts you in the pork industry, and hopefully we end with some practical suggestions on things that you can do to help mitigate the impact of that. Well, if you haven't noticed, we are having a national conversation about food. And if we were to watch really what the media is telling us today in regards to the food system, this basically tells us that the consumer is a little nervous. They have some questions, and they're asking very fundamental questions. Is my food safe? Is my food nutritious? What is in my food? And was food indeed better 50 years ago than it is today? And should we revert back to a different kind of food system? I like this quote by Russ Parsons. He's a columnist with the LA Times. I've actually tried to get him to speak, but he says he's a much better writer than he is a speaker, and he's petrified of audiences. But anyway, he put this out in January of 2010, that we are basically having a long overdue conversation. But I think he correctly points out that it's not much of a conversation. In fact, if anything, you could boil it down to almost a shouting match back and forth. And as I've asked the question, what is missing in regards to this national conversation? What is missing is balance. I mean, the consumer today has some very realistic questions. And oftentimes they are asking an ethical question, and we give them on the other side a scientific answer, and they're saying, you don't understand the question I am asking. They will ask about GMO in foods, and we give them the scientific answer, and they're saying, it's not, can you do these things? I'm asking you the ethical question, should you be doing these things? And there's a big difference in those two things. And the reality is what's missing oftentimes is balance. The reality that today the consumer does need to be concerned about health and well-being, and they are. They also need to be concerned about nutrition. But we also need to take in consideration a growing global population. We need to take into consideration that our resources are diminishing, and that we have a responsibility far beyond us, that it's not just simply about me. And that is what seems to be missing. Now, in the backdrop, kind of operating here pretty silently, are a couple global realities that I just want to put on the table so that you remember these, and I think it's important that we keep these in mind. Now, the department or the federal government calls these virtual happenings, all right? But the reality is our global population is increasing. The U.S. Census Bureau tells us that every second of every day, 4 people are born, 2 people die. There's a net gain of 2.4. I don't know who that 0.4 person is, but that's the way the math runs out, all right? So every second, 2.4 people. That's 143 people every minute. That's 8,600 people every hour. That's 206,000 people every day. All right? You keep running the math, that's 75.4 million people annually being added to the global population. So if you think about that, we have a country the size of the United States of America coming online every 5 years. The population is increasing. And what that spells then for the food system is that we've got 3 billion more people being added that we've got to feed by mid-century. So over the next 40 years, we grow the global population unless something stops here and we slow down that net gain of 2.4 people a day. And personally, I don't believe it's going to slow down. I mean, I know there's pundits out there that say it will, but I look at, well, how have we been doing lately? All right? So we still have these people to feed, which means that we've got a growing global food supply that needs to be coming online if we want to have people that are fed and fed nutritionally. Okay? The resulting effect is starvation, hunger, starvation, death. Right? So that's our choice. Now, the United Nations also says, as they look at this, that where does that additional food come from? Can we feed 9.8 billion people by the year 2050? And they say that 80% of that is going to have to come from basically technology and innovation, increasing that which we have. Right? We could do some higher cropping density, but that's only going to pick up about 10 to 15%. We could expand the amount of land that we put into production, but again, globally, that's limited as well. So really, the bulk of this is going to have to come from technology and innovation, doing better with what we have. Now, virtual fact number 2, or global reality number 2, is that today, 1 in 6 people globally go to bed hungry. 1 billion people. Now, if you're like me, you probably don't see that. But even in the United States, 11 million of our, 360 million still go to bed hungry. Not enough food to eat. Now, if we add what we call now the food insecure people, those that because of economic constraints don't either have enough money right now to properly feed their family, or the reality that they're not getting the right nutrition or calorie intake to actually grow. These are realities. That number, if you put the food insecure people, jumped up to about 3% of the U.S. population, probably somewhere around 49 or 50 million people. So these things are very key realities. Now, we put that backdrop against today's consumer reality. And today's consumer has a plethora of choices regarding the food system. In fact, we live in a very blessed society today. The World Bank says that as Americans, we probably spend roughly 10% of our disposable income on food. The Department of Agriculture will even ratchet that number down even further and say it's probably somewhere a little over 6% of your disposable income for food. Now compare that to the United Kingdom, somewhere in the vicinity of 22%. Compare that to Japan, somewhere in the vicinity of 25 to 26% of their disposable income, or even India. India, you'll get numbers ranging from 35 to 50% of their disposable income simply for food. So we have a society today that asks the food system to produce the food that they want, when they want it, in a way that they want it, and they can also say, we want it produced in our manner of preference. Make it consistent with my personal values. And that's choice, right? And we like choice. And there's nothing wrong with choice. If the consumer has disposable income to buy organic, or to buy natural, or to buy cage-free, or to buy humanely treated, or to buy anything like that, it is a matter of preference. That is a wonderful attribute of our society. That's great. So, if you want to shop at Whole Foods, or if you want to shop at Costco, or if you want to eat at McDonald's, or you want to eat at Chipotle, the reality is you can do all of that in the United States. But what we have now is this two-tiered food system where we've got controversial foods and we have non-controversial foods. And that's really what it's starting to boil down to. Now there's another movement out here that would like to go back to the way things used to be and say that really food was better back in the 1950s. So why don't we just go back? All right? And that's what I call it, the I'm okay, you're okay approach. Anybody remember I'm okay, you're okay? That's kind of was really popular when I went through college, transcendent meditation or whatever it was called. All right? But what it says, it's all about me, right? And if I want food produced the way I want it, then it ought to be okay for the rest of the people. But what do we do about the billion that go to bed hungry every night? Do they want the food system to revert back to 1950? What do you think? Yes? No? No, they don't want that. Would they like to have what Americans have, the number of choices in the disposable income to buy food at 10% of their annual income? Oh, sure they would. They would love to have that. And you don't get there by going back to the 1950s. Now, what they want and what they're asking for is responsible choice. And really, at the end of the day, we have to do, as a food system, we have to do what's right. Just as you have to do what's right as you produce pork, we have to do what's right when we make choices in regards to the food system of what's right for people, what's right for the planet, and what's right for the animals. And keep those things in mind. Now, the public does have a right to expect the food system to act in a very responsible manner. That is a fundamental right that they have, and we'll give them that right, all right? But what's going on right now, rather than slinging mud and say, you know what, those that are critical of the food system are uninformed people. I mean, I'll grant you that, but rather than rely on that, or calling them the social elite, that are out here trying to do something behind the scenes, I really think that this new interest in food gives us in the food system and you as in the pork industry an opportunity to do two things. Number one, it gives you an opportunity to look in the mirror, to take an inward look and ask yourself, in what I do, in what I practice, in how I produce this, is it right? Not can I, but should I? Is it the right thing to do? And it gives us a great opportunity to tell a story that we haven't been so good about telling. We've been great at food efficiencies. We've been great at taking technology and applying that. We've done a horrible job in talking to the consumer about the kinds of things that we do. And really what I think it reflects is two things. One, it reflects the fact that we haven't done a very good job about really explaining the food system to people. And number two, most consumers actually believe. At the end of the day, it doesn't really bother me. It should bother me, but it doesn't. And I think a lot of people are motivated by that guilt. Now, what's happening though is oftentimes when we look at the food system, we've got a group of people out here that want to rebuke the food system and say, you know, we really ought to go back to planting our gardens, we ought to go back to the farmers markets and revert back to the way things used to be, instead of looking at what the food system is today and really celebrating the great successes that we have. It's not only the fact that we spend less disposable income for our food, but it's the reality of we're doing more with less. And you know that more than anyone else. You know the production efficiencies that take place not only in livestock production, but also in crop production. Another thing that creates some confusion out here within the consumer are NGOs. These are non-government organizations. Now, this is a term that was coined by the United Nations when they formed their charter in 1945. If you want to dig for it, you can find it in Chapter 10, Article 71. But these were groups that the United Nations looked to and said that they have some key attributes in the reality that they are private, non-profit organizations that are typically formed around a certain cause. And that they have two key attributes for the United Nations. One is that they're altruistic. In other words, they're focused on the public good. And then number two is that they're driven by principle. Now, the reality is there's some up here that you probably agree with, and there's some up here that you probably disagree with. And the number of NGOs in the United States continues to grow. There's well over 2 million of those, and some people say there's somewhere around 300,000 to 400,000 of them that have something to do with food. All right? And so they enter the conversation in this as well. Now, the one that's probably the most familiar to you in the pork industry is Wayne Pacelle. The reality is this is an 11 million member organization. They are the 10th most well-known nonprofit brand in the United States. So they rank up there with United Way and folks like that. And they have a message. They have high credibility with the consumer today. And with messages like this, we're not telling people to become vegetarians. We're just urging them to exhibit greater decency. You can't argue with that. You would agree with that point too. On top of this is some confusion about people's moral and ethical position in regards to food. It goes back to Charlie Brown and his guilt. All right? What do we do with this? This just happens to be the little sign about bunnies or meat animals. I won't run the video. It's pretty humorous anyway, but there's confusion. And people don't know where they stand in regards to these issues. So you have a worldview that these are commodities. These are objects. You really don't know your animals. That's the message that's being out there. Now, we have to help the consumer understand that the food system has changed. It isn't the idyllic culture that it used to be when they were closer connected to the farm. And we really haven't done ourselves any favors. We know why this is here, but the consumer doesn't know why this is here. In fact, if anything, the consumer really wonders what's going on beyond that barrier. What's going on in those white barns that have no windows and things that I can't see. So that's why when there's undercover video that comes out, and that's the only thing that the consumer sees, is it any wonder that's what they believe is happening rather than something that's atypical? I call this the new normal. The new normal is we have to shift our paradigm of thinking in how we approach these issues. We're not going to be able to respond to the consumer the way we are known to do that in the past. It's got to be something different. And that's really what the Center for Food Integrity does. It's out there to help the consumer understand that they can trust, that they can have confidence in today's food system. And we do that through a variety of ways, sharing accurate, balanced information, addressing misinformation when it occurs, doing stakeholder engagement with people when we can, and then making sure that best practices are modeled. Now, let's do a little deeper dive into what it is that drives trust. For those of you that have seen this before, I apologize. This is our trust model. This is a foundational model that we use, but I think it's important to explain. In order to build trust, this is a model that we built, thank you to the pork industry, for really back in 2006 and early 2007. We did a meta-analysis of every piece of research information we could find in the food system and boiled it down to what are the drivers of trust. All right? And knowing that at the end of the day, what you really want is freedom to operate. Just let me do that which I'm good at doing, all right? But today, you don't get the freedom to operate unless you get the social license, all right? And let me just explain. Trust here is the privilege that you have to operate with minimal formalized restrictions. And we say that's legislation, regulation, and there's also this issue of market requirements that comes into that, by maintaining the public trust because you do what's right. All right? And that's really what happens. The consumer trusts you to do what's right. Now, they will trust you when they believe that your activities are consistent with the expectations of society and they align with their values or the values of the community. Okay? So that's what they are giving here, is value alignment. Now, when we uncover what trust really is, there's three primary drivers. One is influential others. These are people that have a similar worldview to them. They're also credentialed individuals, doctors, dietitians, attorneys, CPAs, people that have some form of higher education credibility. Secondly, it's competence. Competence is simply your technical expertise to get the job done. Are you educated? Are you applying that education? Do you have the mental capacity to make that happen? The third driver is confidence, which is just simply value similarity. Do you have the same values that I have? Now, I don't have them up here, but there are 5 global values that transcend culture, transcend gender. They're compassion, responsibility, respect, fairness, and truth. And really, when you boil it down, that's what they're looking at. Are you compassionate? Are you responsible? Do you have respect for me as a consumer? Do you have your respect for workers that you hire? Do you have respect for animals? Are you being fair? And are you being truthful? Am I getting the honest story? All right? Now, this is data from our last year's consumer survey work. This comes out every October. In fact, I don't get the first data run until next week of the 2010 study. But right now, this is work that has been peer-reviewed and tested. And I just want to show you, the numbers aren't important, but I want to show you just some of the correlations. An R squared here of 1.0 just means that we can explain trust, which we're trying to measure here. All right, we can explain it completely from these 2 variables, confidence and competence. And that's what we were testing. What level does your technical expertise have on consumer trust, and what level does value similarity have on consumer trust? Are you with me on that? Okay, so what we're looking at is an ideal world, 1.0, we can explain all the trust. Half of it would come from confidence, half of it would come from competence. Okay, that's the model. Now, I might add too here, in social science, which is different from bench science, point 3 is publishable information. So point 3 and up is good data, right? Whereas in bench science, you need to get a lot closer to that 1.0 where you're replicating something on a regular basis. This is, last year, again, drivers of consumer trust. This is food safety. This was across all groups, okay, so all kinds of people that we tested. An R squared of 0.69, which is fairly high. We can explain roughly 69% of the trust in this issue area from these 2 variables. But what I want you to see is not the number, but the difference, okay? The difference that values make in regards to building consumer trust and food safety. Do you align with my values? This is in sustainability. Again, look at the correlation between the 2 variables. Humane treatment of farm animals, R squared of 0.7. We can explain 70% of consumer trust from humane treatment of farm animals. They will trust you more when they understand that your values align with theirs. Not your ability to get it done, whether your values are there. Now, just to cut to the chase, shared values with the consumer are 4 to 5 times more important in building their trust and confidence than your ability to get the job done. It's not that science isn't important, okay? But they're not asking science questions. They're asking ethical questions. And they want to know about your values. Now, a couple observations about today's consumer is, number one, they're disinterested and relatively uninformed about the food system. They trust you unless you give them some reason not to trust you. That's why undercover video has such a detrimental effect on all of you. It doesn't matter the industry. They also trust farmers, but they don't believe what you're doing today is farming. Contemporary food production isn't farming. Unless they can see it, unless they can meet you directly, unless they can find you at the local market, that's what they consider the farmer. Anything beyond that, and it really doesn't make any difference whether you're a family farm or not, anything beyond that, they don't trust. And the challenge is we have to fundamentally reintroduce the food system to a group of people that are disinterested and uninformed, that don't believe that your values align with theirs, and that are seeing an increased number of voices really questioning what's happening within the food system. Now, as we continue to break down this research, we are looking at the consumer we were looking at what kind of a model will give us a better understanding of how we introduce the public to technology and innovation to the point where they will accept it and adopt it. All right? And we use the Everett-Rogers model for adoption diffusion. It just basically divides the population into these 5 areas. All right? And I'll just quickly rocket through this. But when we do the research, it's issue dependent, okay? And they self-classify what role they're in. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they will be an early adopter or a laggard in a food safety area and also be that same way in the humane treatment for farm animals. Okay? My kids are early adopters in the area of cell phone technology. They're laggards when it comes to financial management. Okay? So it doesn't really matter what area they're in. Now, they don't go through and say, hey, I'm an innovator, I'm an early adopter, I'm an early majority, and I'm a laggard. All right? They don't necessarily say that or own up to that. They just say, I only think about the issue when I'm forced to. All right? And that classifies the laggard. Now, the only reason I put this up is because where we are focused at the Center for Food Integrity is on the early majority. On the early adopter. And there's a reason why we're focused on the early adopter, and that is because they tend to be the opinion leaders. They tend to be those that influence others. They're the gatekeepers of change. They're more articulate. They seek out educational information, and they're significantly more likely to believe information when it is presented to them. Right? So when we look at them in a mix with the rest of the population, they're more rational, more favorable toward change. They're typically more educated. They have a higher social and professional prestige. They have a high degree of opinion leadership, greater adoption on innovation. Now, what I want you to see here is I won't share all this data, but this is on nutrition. More people, when it comes to nutrition, say they are an early adopter, that they spend time searching out information to make an informed decision. When it comes to humane treatment of farm animals, which you're probably more interested in, only 1 in 5 say they are an early adopter. In fact, more of them say they are part of this early to late majority, that they trust that it's okay. This is the Charlie Brown comment. I really don't think about it. Maybe I should, but I really just simply want permission to go ahead and do that which I want to do. I like my meat, milk, and eggs, and I want to continue to do that. Now, we continue to do the research. Thank you to the pork industry through Pork Checkoff and National Pork Producers Council, also to the Indiana Soybean Alliance, because you take a run of this data where you take a deeper dive to see what Indiana looks at. But here are some key findings from our qualitative focus groups. I'll just put these up real quick. They do seek unbiased information about the food system, which makes websites from farm organizations suspect. Okay? So they're looking for unbiased information. They're looking for credentialed individuals, which means that they're really looking to universities primarily to get their information, to trust them. And they also look to government. USDA, FDA, Center for Disease Control, those types of entities. They are generally skeptical, they were generally skeptical of the messages that we put out there, particularly those things that did not correlate with their personal beliefs, all right? They wanted facts from third parties they trusted. Now remember, this is a very small segment of the population. This is the early adopter segment. These are the ones that are the opinion leaders, those that move social change. Okay, they're deeply skeptical and distrustful of technology and innovation, and they also believe that it doesn't matter how you're owned. If you're large, you're factory. Okay, it didn't make any difference. Other key findings were food safety, nutrition, and health are topics of greatest concern, not humane treatment of farm animals, although it does rank there. I'll show you that in just a minute. They have difficulty believing that the food system is improving because of what they read in the media. The number of food recalls, the number of undercover video, the negative coverage makes them question. The school lunch program, for those of you that are connected with the Indiana legislature, watch for this one because this is a battleground. You're on the forefront of it nationally. You're going to be on the forefront of it on the state as well. School lunch program, they say, is really responsible, along with large food conglomerates, are responsible for obesity in the United States. And they also felt that they should do the more socially responsible thing and buy more organic, buy foods locally, and only eat what's in season. Again, that's the early adopter. It's not the early and late majority. This is an interesting one, and that is that they have a hard time reconciling these principles. And that is, if it's convenient, it can't be nutritious. So they are forced then to make a decision to whether or not they want something nutritious or do they want something that's convenient for them. Okay? They can't reconcile those two terms. They also have tension with processing. So if there's processing, that must mean that it's less expensive. That must mean that it's not as good for me as something that is not processed. The other thing that we found out, and this one shocked me when I saw this one coming through on the focus groups, that what they're really saying here is it's about me. We don't need to be concerned with a growing global population. In fact, some of them said, we don't even believe the numbers. And even if you put up World Bank numbers, United Nations numbers, USDA numbers, they just don't believe them. All right. So there's really this growing thought that it's all about here at home, and that bears out in some of the quantitative stuff. This is the quantitative piece. This is just back. This is top line stuff. We asked them to rate summary of concerns. And I put this slide in here by gender, just to show you that there are some gender differences. The U.S. economy is still the number one issue among men and women. Rising healthcare costs jumped from 4 last year up to number 2 this year. Unemployment in the United States, we didn't test that last year, but that's their third highest level of concern. Rising energy went from number 2, dropped to number 4. My personal financial situation still stayed there at number 5, but the rising cost of food, less concern today than there was in October of last year. The thing to look at is we don't get excited until this number gets over 8. Now, I suppose you could take 7.94, you could take these 3 and say, you know what, we probably need to pay attention to these 3 right here. The thing I want you to see, though, is look at the difference between women and men. All right? Now, there's mostly men in this room. There are a couple women. But the reality is the women are much more concerned with these kinds of issues than men. So when it comes to rising cost of food, they're over 8. Okay? Food safety, they have dropped now down below that area. Let's look at humane treatment of farm animals. 6.5 when we look at the combined number, 7.1 with women versus 5.5 with men. Men are much more trusting in regards to the kinds of things that you do than women are. The other thing, this is a busy slide, but I just want you to see the sources of information. And again, we're focused right now on the early adopter, and what this data tells us is they're really going to the web to get their information, which is good news for those of us that are wanting to build trust and confidence in the food system, because we know where they're going and we can battle it there. We can't battle it here. We can't really adequately address early and late majority decision makers because they're going to television to get most of their information. Now, how do we communicate to build trust? Well, a couple of thoughts. The reality is you've got great core values. You've got a story to tell. But we need to get better. I'm not rebuking you, but we need to get better at telling the story. And I understand typically we're introverted in that manner, and we don't always like to express ourselves. But the new normal is you got to tell consumers what it is that you're doing and help them connect with the food system. You have to understand, spend time listening to the consumer, understand what's important to them. Don't just simply dismiss them as uninformed and unintelligent or some social elitist. Listen to them and ask them some questions. What concerns you most about how animals are treated on the farm? What would help you address that issue? What would make you feel more comfortable in regards to those things? So it's connecting with people to understand what's important to them, what's important to you, and finding some commonalities that you can build trust. You may not agree with everything. In the course of a conversation, you may have to disengage and realize that, you know what, I'm never going to change your mind, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you anyway. You may, God forbid, have to open up your farm and say, I'd like you to come out and see or I'd like for you to at least, I'd like to go to a place where I can at least tell you my story and the things that I'm doing. And connect with them at these value levels. What they're asking is, are you compassionate? So tell them about the kindness that you actually take in regards to animals. All right? Refute the Wayne Pacelle who portrays you as simply thinking of these things as widgets and as commodities, and the fact that you don't care. That's what he tells the public. Share with them that you do care. Share with them the responsibility that you have as an industry professional, and the things that you do or what you believe in regards to animal abuse and those that abuse animals. Tell them about how you're protecting the environment, how you balance the needs of a growing global population, how you take care of animals, and how you're doing more with less in regards to the environment and in the use of sustainable resources. And then just be honest with them. Be honest with them. That's all they're looking for. And begin to practice the message. You've got great messages, but you need to be thinking. They're questioning antibiotics. They're questioning modern agriculture. They're questioning economics, food affordability, food safety. They want to know about neighborhoods and communities and how this is changing things. So talk to them about these messages. And I won't spend the time going through this, but we have a whole training program that we can help walk you through. Again, talking about values, balancing it with science, and at the end of the day, making sure that the economic argument is on the table. Because at the end of the day, the consumer understands you need to make money or they don't get fed. And they're willing to do that, but you have to connect with a value message first before they're going to hear these other things. So really, I believe it's being transparent with your values. Give people permission to believe that your practices are consistent with their values and expectations. That's what the majority is just simply looking for. Give me permission to believe. And I also believe it means a change in mindset for us. We have to quit this playing not to lose and start playing to win, and realize that we have to codify the message differently. Now, the public has a role in this as well, and this is a message that we give to the public when they ask about the food system. And that is, number one, spend the time to learn more about your food. We know you're disinterested and uninformed, so spend some time learning where your food comes from. All right? And balance your perspective. Right? This is one of the values that the American public has a hard time reconciling. They spend very little disposable income for their food. Right? But the reality is, what the First Lady is concerned with in childhood obesity, the Premier in China is concerned with just making sure that everybody has enough food. All right? So help the public understand there's balance to this equation. There is a growing global population that has to be fed. There are sustainable resources that have to be maintained. And we need to balance that. And celebrate your status. The reality is, choice is good. This choice is a great thing. And it's something to be celebrated. Two, we have a safe, abundant, affordable, nutritious food system. We need to celebrate that. We also need to make sure that we understand the public has a right to expect that we act in a responsible manner. And then help the consumer understand the consequences. So the next time you hear someone who says, let's revert back to the way it was in 1950, ask them, is that really something that we want to do? Let's just trace that subject for a little bit here, okay? Ideas have consequences. So do decisions. And you understand that very well, that as decisions are made in rulemaking or in regulations or in legislatures, that they have consequences, and we need to be careful what we do. And the reality is, decisions we make today may limit, not saying they would, but they may limit our ability to feed those that are hungry in the United States, and also, going beyond our own self-interest, that which is in the world and in future generations. So really, codify this message. It's about supporting responsible, efficient food systems that allow us to produce the food necessary to meet the needs of a growing global population by using fewer resources. And that's really what it's about. We need to meet the needs, we need to use fewer resources, and we need to support a safe, nutritious, affordable, abundant food supply.